Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fifth and final session in our five-part series, Let's Talk, Closing the Racial Gap in STEM, focusing today on what are our next steps. I'm Martha McCabe, Executive Director of the Kansas City STEM Alliance, and on behalf of our advisory board, our funders, and the STEM Connect KC ecosystem leadership team, we thank you for joining us today for an engaging and real conversation. Our team at the KC STEM Alliance has been on a journey involving executive leadership training and staff development to better understand systemic racism, implicit bias, and gatekeeping that creates education and economic inequities impacting the students and families right here in Kansas City. And to understand what the role of the KC STEM Alliance should be to support those doing this work and to become even stronger partners and allies. These sessions represent our efforts in creating a bigger and deeper commitment to this work. And we consider this series Design Thinking in Action as we listen to our panelists, and we'll continue to do that today. For those in attendance at the first session, I used the words palpable urgency. I believe those words accurately reflect how the team at the KC STEM Alliance feels, and probably many of you listening, as well as all of our panelists, relative to the current climate here in Kansas City and across our country, and the importance of understanding and taking action on closing the racial gap in STEM. We are currently involved in the Kauffman Foundation's Race, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion 18-month project, which aligns well with what we are learning from these sessions by listening to thoughtful, insightful, and honest panelists. We're looking forward to continuing to meet together after this series closes so that we can establish a strategic plan in alignment with so many of you doing this work throughout Kansas City. This work is important. The time is now, and together we can accomplish great things. One of the strategies in helping to close the racial gap in STEM was the strategic hiring by the KC STEM Alliance of a dedicated staff member focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're delighted to have an outstanding individual leading this work for our ecosystem, Christina Chandler. Chrissy is a teacher, a computer scientist, and IT professional, and serves as the program delivery partner for First Lego League. Her experience in understanding the value of learning computer science skills and how to translate those skills into a career makes her a perfect fit for translating the new education policy around computer science as a graduation credit, which we learned about last week. Her passion for education and inspiring young people to explore and engage in STEM has been an incredible gift to our work here at the KC STEM Alliance. We look forward to her leadership as the STEM Alliance embraces even more initiatives to ensure that all people have the opportunity to explore the world of STEM. It is my pleasure now to introduce you to Christina Chandler.
Thank you so much, Martha, for your kind words. You know, I can't think of a better way to kick off the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that I will be doing with the KC STEM Alliance. The information we've gathered from this five-part series will guide the strategies and conversations we will have for years to come. Making sure that all students have access to rich and rigorous STEM opportunities has always been a passion of mine and of the KC STEM Alliance's. Now we will work together to turn that passion into action. I'm looking forward to continuing these conversations over the coming years as we recognize there is so much urgency in this work, and we all work together to ensure that all students have access to STEM opportunities that prepare them for our workforce. I thank you all, and I look forward to working with you all on this journey. And now I would like to introduce Andrea Ellis. She is the Director of Strategic Learning for the Kansas City Public Library System, and she will moderate this series. And I'd like to take a moment to thank Andrea for her work and the work she's done helping me organize this series and convene all of these excellent voices to guide us. Her continued work and advocacy around making sure that all students have access to diverse learning opportunities is going to be an integral part in this journey. Thank you so much, Andrea, and I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Chrissy. Yeah, that title is kind of a mouthful, so I understand how you can stumble over that. So as she said, I am Andrea Ellis, and I am the Director of Strategic Learning at the Kansas City Public Library and also a KC STEM Alliance board member. thank you for sharing your time with us today. This is the fifth and final conversation of this series. So much has been shared and processed since we began on May 19th, and I am confident today's conversation will continue to both challenge perspectives and validate experiences. So the focus of this series is to name and acknowledge the barriers to success in STEM for individuals of color, and to recognize and honor where there have been both systemic and personal successes in addressing those barriers. So the chat and Q&A are active today. If you have questions specifically for the panelists, please use the Q&A. Use the chat as normal, but also if you are inclined and have any resources that you would like to share, please put them in the chat. We are keeping track of all of those resources and we'll share them back out to all who registered at the end of the series. Lastly, there will not be an additional Q&A after this session, as it has been for the last four. Since this is the last conversation in the series, we have chosen to extend the actual body of the conversation. So we will formally end today at 12:45 instead of our normal 12:30. So now I'm going to introduce Ann Zimmerman, who's been our graphic recorder for the series, and she's going to give us a brief recap of what came out of the conversation last week. Ann?
Good morning, Andrea, and hello to everybody. We'll just jump right into what happened last week. So Terry, if you could share our picture. So our focus last week was on closing the racial gap in high school. Daniel Benyon led this conversation with data that reinforced the fact that the racial gap in STEM is real, and we have to find ways to interrupt those pathways to inequity. Looking at the college and career roadmap, students move through these stages of awareness, exposure, and preparation. But there are many barriers that can get in the way: cultural, imposter syndrome, unconscious bias, and gatekeepers. As leaders and trusted adults, we are all called to interrupt those pathways of inequities, to confront, examine, and dismantle inequity when we see it, as well as rebuilding the connections so that all young people have opportunities to explore STEM. Then we moved on to a great panel with Oz Qureshi and Marcus Brown, both of who worked directly with students, either at MindDrive or the Kansas City Digital Media Lab. Danielle Binion joined us again, and Nakaya Woodley, who is a senior at Park Hill High School and a leader on her first robotics team. They talked about the power of after-school programs where adults can build safe environments for young people to explore STEM. After growing up with robotics in Hawaii and Kansas City, Nakaya talked about believing in yourself, sticking with it, the power of mentors and parents, and finding something you love and a place where you belong. Oz reinforced the concerns that many parents of color have, not knowing what STEM is, but even more importantly, maybe worrying about the safety of their students or racism that they may face as they engage in competitions that are outside their comfort zone. We know there are both systemic barriers at the state level and the need for more creative approaches in the education system. There are also individual barriers our students face who have gaps in learning that can stand in the way of their participation in STEM. There's also a need for teachers and trusted adults to listen to the needs of students and build the trust and connections for them to engage in STEM, as well as supporting these teachers of color and more teachers of color so that there are more role models and the ability to scale STEM opportunities for all. And we are all called to do more, to be intentional. We know there are students of color that want to do STEM and can be successful in STEM. We need to do more to find them and to make connections that matter, to listen to what motivates them and affirm that they belong and can be successful in STEM. So that's a really quick recap from last week. I'm looking forward to the conversation today and another illustration.
Thank you, Ann. She's done a wonderful job of kind of capturing the essence of these conversations over the past 4 weeks. So we appreciate you. I just wanted to share, I had a conversation with an organizational leader recently where I was talking about this work of racial equity, and I was saying, it's hard work. And their response was, why is it hard? And I thought to myself, you're probably not doing the work, because if you are honestly and authentically doing this work, whether personally, locally, or on a national level, it is hard. in so many ways. So why do it? You know, that's the question each of us have to answer for ourselves. We individually have to answer it, right? Because I only know my why, right? I have to figure out the why for me. You have to figure out the why for you, because this work is hard and because the journey is a marathon. And it's a marathon that even after I finish my 26.2 miles, I have to hand the baton to someone else because the race keeps going. Yet it is conversations like these and the actions that come as a result of these conversations that remind me, and I hope you, that we are part of a community that is doing this hard work together. You are not alone. We are not alone. So let me introduce you to our keynote for today. Samara Crawford Herrera is Director of Community Partnerships at SchoolSmart KC, where she works to support and demand quality schools on behalf of students and families within Kansas City. Samara, take it away.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Again, I am Samara Crawford Herrera, and I'll be providing just some brief remarks this morning to challenge and empower all of us for the work that lies ahead. Or in other words, I'm just going to be Andrea Ellis's stunt double, but don't be confused by stunt double. I just mean that I don't take her naps and I'm going to eat all the bad stuff off her plate. That's the kind of stunt double I'm going to be. But before we get started, I would really like to say a special thank you to each of you for joining us as we conclude our Closing the Racial Gap series presented by the KC STEM Alliance. Whether you attended one session or all of them, if you showed up, it means there is something about the importance of elevating the student experience for all youth as they engage in the STEM field that compels you. It really propels everything that you do. We cannot care about wanting the best for children, the best neighborhoods, the best healthcare, the best careers and jobs, unless we care about wanting the best opportunities for their learning experiences. And that, my friends, that's the work today. It's just the work. We must equip ourselves to support the process of increasing the school community capacity, right? It's building the capacity to empower students of color, their educators and their families to achieve far greater success in the STEM field than history has ever afforded them. And I like to believe that because the African proverb teaches us that if you want to go fast, go alone, or as I like to say, go by yourself. But if you want to go far, we must go together. And so we know that our collective work and responsibility demands that we partner together for student success. So I am overwhelmingly grateful for your commitment to students, to school success, today and every day, because as Andrea said, it's a marathon. All right, so let's get into it, right? I need to let y'all know that I'm from the South and I'm married to a pastor, which means if I don't get a little call or response to these calls to action, I'm gonna be a little devastated. I might cry myself to sleep. So please mumble out loud, shout, chat your thoughts, all of the good things that show that you're along on this journey with me. Can I get an amen? Okay.
Amen, amen.
Amen. See, that's what I'm talking about. All right. By being here today, what you've resigned to, what you've come to grips with, is that there is a gap within our community between our kids of color, between our educators of color and our white students in the engagement with STEM learning. Those experiences that lead to eventual careers. If you agree with that, go ahead and snap twice where you are. You've also realized that our action and our inaction contributes either knowingly or unknowingly to the unyielding presence of this gap. If you still agree, snap 2 more times. That was 3 times. I can't count y'all, I promise. And finally, if you're here, you want to do something about those first 2 facts. You want to do something, you really want to move into action. Let me just offer you a few ideas for this part of the marathon, okay? Number 1, I need you to get beyond the gap. Closing the gap, right? We have to believe and trust that we're going to do that work. Getting beyond the gap means that we have a vision, right? We have a vision for our society. We have a vision for our students, our schools, and the cities in which we find ourselves as it relates to STEM and equity, right? You have to have a place to strive toward in order to stay in this work. So my first homework task, because I know y'all all about this homework, okay, is to write down a vision for STEM justice. I'm going to use that word a lot, STEM justice, right? What can and should this look like for all of our kids 20 years from now, right? What does that look like? What's that vision statement? Write that down. Number 2, you have got to get proximate to power, but you better have an agenda. Now, the vision statement that you created, that's great. That's you know, we love a vision board. We love somewhere to set our eyes to the hills, right? But you've got to have the key action steps to get there. And that's your agenda for the next year. I want you to really think about the 3 things that you want from our community, from our world, on behalf of our students, on behalf of STEM justice, right? What are 3 action steps? Is it access to increased technology? I'm not going to prattle them all off because I don't want y'all taking mine, because I have action steps and, you know, y'all might copy off my homework. But you need to identify 3 things. That's your agenda. And what you're going to do with those 3 things is to identify 3 power brokers, right? We've talked about gatekeepers, but there are also power brokers, right? Those individuals that when you can bring them along, right, they're able to catapult and elevate the agenda, right, that you have. 3 people that you intend on chirping in their ear for the next year on this agenda, right? Whether it's the principal at a school, the superintendent, state legislator, it's a parent. These are the people with their power can really move toward action. Make them tired of seeing you coming because they know what you want, right? Do not let up. Do not let up and bring others along with you. It is okay to have an agenda for our students. All right. Number 3, I'm kind of a nerd, and I was a big Game of Thrones fan. If any of you all are out there, there was a character on the show called Hodor, and we didn't find out until much later in the series that Hodor actually stood for hold the door, right? We've talked a lot about gatekeepers and trusted adults. What I offered to you is a 3rd entity on that spectrum, which is the people that hold open the door, right? Hold the door. How are you holding the door for students? How are you celebrating their successes? Are you relentlessly showing up for them? And that goes a little bit beyond just being a trusted adult. That is really about propping open and holding space for students, particularly our students of color, right? That's incredibly important. Last thing, you have got to build a community. This is a marathon. Recently, my daughter wrangled me into volunteering at an aid station for Kansas City's Hospital Hill run. And our job was just to provide Gatorade and water. Now, I want to be clear, I don't run, okay? Now, those who can't do, you get it, right? But what I was struck by were the people who were running, who were doing the thing that I was like, oh, I can't do that. 13.2, 26.2, yeah, I don't have that in me, right? They were saying thank you to us as they would run by and we'd hand out Gatorade and water, right? And it struck me that they needed us. You need your community. So the final set of homework is to write down 5 people that are going to be your Gatorade and water givers, right? Maybe it's not Gatorade and water. Maybe it's another beverage. I don't know. But they have got to be people that you know that you need to cheer you on, right? But choose wisely, right? Because as we know, you're influenced by the 5 people who are closest to you. I messed around and put Andrea Ellis in my 5, and now she has me out here thinking that I'm like, man, is it too late to become an engineer? It's too late. But that's the homework, y'all. By being here today, you have been knighted in a long line of justice activists before you. Answer the call, right? That's all we do every day. Go to bed, wake up, and answer the call. Your activism is going to be different than anyone else, right? So don't judge yourself according to that progress in this work. You must simply wake up each morning and answer the call. Unless it's Andrea at 5 a.m. You don't need to answer that. Thank you for allowing me to be here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Miss Samara. And listen, if I call at 5 o'clock in the morning, it's for a reason. Answer the phone. Like I'm not just calling folks at 5 o'clock.
I mean, I'm just saying, call twice.
But no, that was wonderful. Thank you. And it is getting our minds oriented around action steps, which is so important to this conversation, to this process rather. So I'd like to ask all of the panelists to turn on their cameras and microphones now and join this conversation. We have, really great group of people here today that I think will add a lot to this conversation. And what I'm going to ask each of them to do first is just introduce themselves, kind of where they're working, their affiliation, and then just a broad concept about what you think is important in this conversation around closing the racial gap in STEM. And then we'll start going with the questions. So if we could just start that part with Sequoia.
Perfect. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I am Sequoia Beecham. I am a 5th grade teacher in the Kansas City area. And it is my belief that educators have to be the ones to speak out and question the disparities that exist with providing our students with that equitable access to STEM.
Thank you, Sequoia. Edgar?
Buenos dias, everyone. I'm Edgar Palacio. I run an organization called the Latinx Education Collaborative, and we work on increasing representation of Latinx educators in K-12. My big goal is to create a sense of belonging. Belonging is critical in this work. And so I believe if we can create spaces for our students to belong, that they will thrive.
Fabulous. Thank you. And Sylvester?
Hey, thank you. I really excited to be here. So I'm the CEO of Coded by Kids. We're a tech and innovation education organization. We focus on preparing underrepresented young people for leadership positions in the tech and innovation space, with a particular focus on preparing them to start venture capital backed startups. And then I'm also the managing director of Plainsight Capital. We're an early stage venture capital fund focused on underrepresented founders in the tech space.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sylvester. And then Samara, you kind of given us your one. Do you have another overarching concept you want us to just keep in mind before we start?
Oh, goodness.
If not, it's okay to say, well, don't.
I left it all on the floor, as they say. I left it all on the floor, but yes, I'm just happy.
I'm sure you'll have more to contribute.
These people, yes.
All right, well then I'd really love to start this conversation going back to Sylvester. I want to know kind of for you, what was the genesis of Coded by Kids? Why did you think that was important to do? Because I think that is an organization that is specifically designed to help close this racial gap in STEM education.
You know me well enough to know you can't give me open-ended questions, because I'm just going to keep talking.
Okay, I'll cut you when we need to cut you. Just go for it.
Why Coded by Kids? Well, the first reason is I believed in more, and I felt we needed something that did more. And what I mean by that is, when there are organizations and programs in especially the tech space that focuses on underrepresented people, especially when we're talking about Black people, we do something where we're basically working towards the lowest common denominator. I get frustrated because often when we're talking about Black and brown people, we're tracking them to workforce development. And those workforce development opportunities often aren't the greatest opportunities. In a way, we're just creating the working poor. We want people to have a job that pays just enough so that they're not on public services, but we don't actually want to move them forward socioeconomically. Then when we talk about entrepreneurship, especially when we talk about Black and Latinx people, it's almost always in the context of small business. We're not talking about Black and Latinx people in the context of starting scalable, high growth tech startups. So I felt like we needed something that filled that gap. I felt like we needed something where we were focused solely on that. So Coded by Kids was really my way of moving something into the tech and innovation education space that had the very explicit mission, vision, goal of giving our young people something more, and being very outcome driven, because that's the other aspect. You know, Coded by Kids, when I started it, I didn't look to education as the model. I actually looked to European youth soccer academies. And the reason I did that was, if you're honest about our education system doesn't produce good outcomes for Black and brown children. Like, if you have an honest conversation about our education system, I have the privilege of being able to travel throughout the country, and I'm talking to educators and talking to education leaders. And 9 times out of 10, if I talk to an education leader and ask them what outcomes they work to, and it doesn't matter where in the country I am, they say graduation rates. Graduation rates is an output, it's not an outcome, but that's how our education system is structured. So I also felt like there was a gap. We needed something that worked to a very different set of outcomes. So that's why Coded by Kids.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sylvester. I really appreciate that. That helps put a lot of it in context and to be thinking a kind of bigger picture. And I just want for everybody, Sylvester is actually located in Philadelphia, right? So he's coming to us from Pennsylvania. So appreciate it. So Edgar, if you don't mind maybe telling us a little bit now why the Latinx Collaborative was important. Why was that a passion for you to get started? And how does that fit into this conversation about closing the STEM racial gap?
I appreciate that question. And Sylvester, I have so much things to say about what you just said, but I'll stick to my question for now. I'm actually really passionate about representation. I think it's so important for our students, for our children, for our community to see ourselves reflected in leadership and decision-making positions in any field. What I know about STEM is that 8% of the STEM workforce is Hispanic Latinx, which ironically is also the same number of teachers nationally. It's that same percentage, 8%. Our community is here and we are growing exponentially. So I think that 1 out of every 4 students in K-12 today is Latinx. That number is going to be 1 out of every 3 and within the next decade. And so we have to do a better job of making sure that our community is front facing, is in front of our students, that they're able to overcome some of these issues, systemic racism, oppression, in order to have those outcomes that we desire. Something that I highly agree with Sylvester. The outcomes aren't great for Black and brown students, but sometimes something that I think about often, I wonder if those are the desired outcomes for our students. And so the system, I'm not a tech person, but I've heard this a couple of times. Systems are designed to produce certain outputs, right? And so I feel like the results that we see for Black and brown students are the results that we want to see for them as a community.
Okay, so y'all starting this off with fire. Okay, so there's going to be a whole lot to come back with both of you guys. But I just wanted to go to Sequoia for a minute and just say, in our pre-conversation, you had shared with me that when you were asked to be on this panelist, you were asked, they said, we want someone who will actually speak truth, right? And I wanted to know from you, what compelled you, what struck a chord for you in that conversation, and what compelled you to agree to be a part of this conversation?
Well, very early on in my career, I was blessed with a very dedicated mentor teacher, and he's very passionate, Derek Pruitt. I'm sure he's done the panel, and being able to work with him and see his work allowed me to see the greater good and what can be done, and to realize that my silence, and like I think it was Samara that said, what we send that message. And that's the same thing Derek said. You send a message whether you do something or you don't do something, whether you say something or you don't do something. And that stuck with me my entire career so far. And the question I always ask myself is, what message am I sending? Am I sending that I agree with, like Edgar and Sylvester said, the system is set up to produce those outcomes that aren't beneficial for many Black and Brown students. And so the question is, do I want to aid in the outcomes that the system set up to provide them, or do I want to support the students and the outcome that they can be and they can do the things they want to do? And I think it was actually at another KC Sim Alliance event that I heard that by 5th grade, kids are deciding what it is they want to do in their future. And as a 5th grade teacher, that really stuck with me, because I'm a part of that pivotal time. And am I going to send them a message and let them know, like, hey, yeah, you can do more, you can be more? And it just got to a point, honestly, I think I shared this with you, it was about 2 years ago was when I finally stopped allowing myself to be timid in the questions that I had and just started asking those questions, and haven't stopped. And it allows me to go to bed with that clear conscience every single night, knowing that I asked the questions that were on my heart. I don't have those, well, I wonder if, or what if. So when I was invited to do this and be honest with my answers, it was something that I had to do, because it's been really the mission that I've taken on over, like I said, the last 1.5 to 2 years of honesty and being another voice for my students and their siblings that are yet to come.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of those action steps that Samara was saying that any individual person can do, right? Is that you can speak up and you can show up for these kids of color, for our kids of color. So Samara, you spoke of closing the gap, right? Or actually closing the gap not being enough, right? And what do you see as kind of the greatest impediment to moving past the idea of just closing the gap and thinking broader? Go ahead.
I think that it is so often, I love what Sylvester said about outputs, the difference between outputs and outcomes, right? And so often we limit ourselves and our ability to dream, right? Radical dreams, right? Deeply rooted in justice and equity type of dreams, right? Dr. King, had a number of writings around like a beloved community, right? And it was really about creating the kind of world, the kind of space that goes beyond gaps, right? We know that it exists. We know often, but we get overwhelmed with it, right? We get overwhelmed with the idea that the Grand Canyon is before us, right? And not the reality that there is a place on the other side that we actually should be focusing our attention to. So, so often we see ourselves steeped in what is not working or what is and not what could be, right? And what I love about each of the individuals that I share space with here today is that they're all visionaries in the fact that they see what can be, not what is. And so I think the impediment to that a lot of times is ourselves, right? Just because we've never seen something exist in a system before is not an excuse for us not to dream and work toward it existing. And so, I think a lot of it is the internal work we have to do as well, right? Like so much of the work that we do, and I love what Sequoia said in terms of her own internal work, right? And how we challenge the precepts that, are deeply entrenched in us, right? Like we come into this world breathing air, breathing, space that has been set forth for us, right? And it is up to us though to interrogate that and to say, well, wait a minute, right? Is there a reason? I joke, Andrea and I talk all the time. I'm like, I could have been an engineer, Andrea. I could have. Probably not. I don't know. But I have to interrogate the ways and the experiences that did or did not provide access to that dream for me, right? I believe I'm where I'm supposed to be, but oftentimes it starts there. That I think is the biggest impediment, is our own internal blockages to what could be.
Yeah, that's huge. I appreciate that. So before I ask another question, I feel like, Sylvester dropped some great knowledge here. Edgar, all of you guys dropped something that I saw other folks' eyes light up. So do you want to maybe take some time and comment on something else that you heard from a panelist Before I throw out another question, something that resonated with you? And if not, I'll.
I can just quickly say, just to reinforce, this is deeply internal and personal work. We talked about the relationships, and Samara brought up the 5 people that you're surrounded with. These are people that have to hold you accountable to when they're not just going to be nice and kind to you and say, oh, it's okay, you can do better. It's like, no, you already knew to do better. And so how do we reconcile? How do we restore lack of trust, right? But it starts, there's no way to say it. It starts with you. We have to be really conscious of our biases. We have to be really conscious of what beliefs we held that may not be true. And that's some of the hard work that needs to be done. I often see us, talking about diversity, equity, inclusion efforts as this like group work kind of activity. And there are portions of it which can and should be group work. But the reality is you have to show up prepared to those conversations. You have to show up and make the contribution yourself. And you have to understand, I think back to your point, Andrea, your own why. Why is being anti-racist important to you? Why is being involved in these in conversations important to you? If you don't have a good answer for that, then your commitment level is probably not going to be where we need it to be in order for you to be effective in this work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Edgar. Sylvester, were you going to add something? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to touch on something Edgar was saying. And Andrea, you and I have had enough conversations. You've probably heard me say this when Edgar was talking about the systems. The systems are producing the results that they were designed to produce. Like, we have to recognize that first, because it's always interesting to me. We try to produce positive outcomes with systems that weren't designed to produce positive outcomes. And then we get frustrated when we don't get positive outcomes. We have to first recognize that that's not what these systems were designed to produce. And then we can start working to talk about what do truly equitable systems look like, right? And how do we build those systems? And how do we create systems that are truly meant to produce the outcomes that we're looking for? Because we can't get there trying to force the systems that we have to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
I think, oh, sorry, Andrea.
No, go ahead. No,
I love that. I mean, I wrote down, I was like, outputs and outcomes, right? So often I love the thought about the graduation rates, right? Being the output, not the outcome. But our systems, so I guess I'm going to ask a question to Sylvester, maybe our other panelists, as I'm struggling through and working through. Many of us work in systems, work alongside systems, we challenge systems, we advocate for systems, right? How do we start to push, these systems beyond, that output focused thinking to outcome based thinking, right? I mean, I think all too often, sometimes we intellectualize the process, but getting real proximate to things that we can do right now, today, tomorrow, the types of things that force us beyond, the systems that have been built and the outcome or the outputs that they create.
Yeah. How do we do that?
I don't know. That's why I asked you.
I know. No, I'm.
I think that this is a big part where it falls, part of that falls on the weight of the teacher's shoulders. And I know we have a lot already on our plate, but we are already working within that system. And I'm not a believer that teachers go into the system to just support it and to keep pushing through like what we do. And it's just I think it's in finding that strength. And I know I shared with Andrea, it took me a little bit, I was hesitant to find my voice because, you do have that dangling fear over not being tenure and not, that doesn't happen until the end of year 5. So your first 5 years, you're usually more timid because you're afraid of what could happen. It doesn't matter that we haven't necessarily seen something happen. We just hear those, you hear the, oh, you're not tenured, be careful, kind of be careful what you say. And it comes from finally finding And knowing, I know for me, I was like, you know what, this job, I was led to this job, and I was led to, and I still remember distinctly having a conversation with the coach that was in the teaching and learning coach in our building when my students were crying after a math lesson and they expected me to move on. And I said, I can't move on. My students aren't ready. Like I cannot move on. I'm letting you know I will be behind. And it takes having that strength. And I can tell you that I wasn't tenure when I finally found my strength, but once I found it, it never went away. I got to the point where I was like, you know what, tenure doesn't matter. I was led here to do right by these children,
Right.
not to do harm. And at the end of my time, I need to be able to say that every decision I made was for them. And so I think there's some power in finding a way that we can help those teachers feel empowered to help ask those questions and to start changing and dismantling what's on the inside already and forcing that change from the inside out, not just the outside in, because we know our STEM partners want the change, but it's the inside that we have, just like with us as humans. I had to do that internal work. We have to do that internal work within our system and bring it out.
That's a good point. That gets an amen. And I actually think that what you're saying is again, the constant conversation. It has to be personal and it has to be, the group work that Edgar mentioned, right? And that happens in the school. It has to happen internally in the school, and then it has to happen outside of the school in partnership with all of these other folks who are doing this good work. But Sylvester, I think you were going to add something to the question.
Yeah, I think that, when we start talking about how do we change that system, or, how do we produce better outcomes from the systems, often in the work that we're doing, we look at ourselves as isolated entities or isolated organizations or programs, and we don't see ourselves as part of a larger system. So I think the first step is we have to see ourselves as part of a larger system and understand how we work in relation to the other parts of that system. We have to then be deliberate about coming up with a strategy for how we work within that system, and then how do we work with our partners to move our partners along, and then be absolutely ruthless about, that strategy. And, how do we execute on that strategy? How do we push people forward? People ask me a lot why I spend as much time with elected officials as I do. And I'll explain, they're a part of the ecosystem. We can't move some of these things forward without policy that's supportive of it. So I have to push on them to get the policy. But then at the same time, I'm also spending a ton of time with corporate partners and corporations, because I'll say they're writing checks. So we need the check from the corporate partner to also support the work. But once you have that strategy for where you fall within that system, how all the different partners and players work together, you have to be ruthless about that strategy and just push and push and push. Because if you're not, things will start to fall by the wayside.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, go ahead, Edgar.
I was going to say I'm taking notes, and so I appreciate the reflection that I'm going to have to do later this evening around this conversation. I want to also just elevate a couple of things. A lot of us aren't afforded the ability to choose, to make a choice. And so, Sequoia, when I'm hearing you speak, I think about this tension between wanting tenure or not, and that tension that we all feel sometimes of what happens, when we do the right thing and the potential outcomes and consequences for that. But even having the ability to choose or to make that decision is a privilege in itself, right? And so I often think about those folks who have decisions made for them, who have to show up and who also feel the level of discomfort, who also feel uncomfortable and don't know what their future is going to look like, but they have no voice. They have no decision-making ability in this conversation. And so I can appreciate and I empathize with discomfort. I feel it myself all the time. And I also have to recognize that I have the privilege of having a voice in these conversations, and I have to use it. That could be a hard thing to learn. It could be a hard thing to practice, and it could be a hard thing to try to overcome. But there are plenty of people who walk into your spaces every day who don't feel like they have a voice, who don't feel like they're understood, who don't feel like they belong. And so if you're feeling uncomfortable, I will guarantee you that they're feeling uncomfortable. And that's just something that, I often think like that's part of the collective nature of this work. It is in the individual nature to be like, oh, my feelings and whatever. And also know that everybody's probably uncomfortable in that space.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, Edgar. I would fully agree with that. And I think earlier I mentioned my mentor teacher, and he was one of the few Black male educators that I've even seen in my own district. And that is actually everything you were mentioning was even something that firsthand I got to see, even when he, with the plethora of knowledge that he has, him having those spaces, and sometimes things that he would say would be questioned, but if it would be said by somebody else, seeing it be like embraced and accepted. And I think that was one of the things that kind of propelled me forward to do my own internal work, to be able to come out of my own comfort zone, to realize that, like you said, I do have that privilege of being, when I'm uncomfortable. And so, yes, I do definitely agree with that.
Can I, Sequoia, would you be willing, kind of as a case study in a way, for you guys to kind of wrap around your thoughts about how you might address this particular situation? Would you mind sharing with everyone what you share with me about the camp invention at your school?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're not familiar, Camp Invention is like, they do mostly summer programs, I believe, where it's like a week long of hands-on interactive STEM. It's a camp that is actually, for some people, like in the different areas, it costs a lot of money. They even did like a whole virtual program where they sent stuff home. But we had a teacher that went to a science conference, and she came back and she did they do year-round STEM programs. Camp Invention's just one of them, one of the attendees. And so she brought it to our elementary school, and the elementary school that I teach in is predominantly Black students. And we did it for a summer or two, and the kids loved it. The parents loved it. It was a huge hit with the kids. They were asking about it, like as soon as, summer school application would come back out, that the parents and the kids that were already involved in it were already asking those questions. Are we doing Camp Invention? Like, they really wanted to do it. After the first 2 summers that we did it at our elementary school, it was moved to another elementary school in our district. Our students still had the opportunity to attend. However, the amount of spaces did not increase, which meant the amount of spaces per school went down. And since it was no longer at our home school, we also had some more challenges getting our students to be able to attend, because a lot of our students were able to walk or to be dropped off on the way to work. It was just more of convenience. I won't speculate why it was moved. However, I do know, and when I shared with Andrea, that is one of the things that it was the first and second year in my teaching career when it started happening. And that's one of the things that I wish I would have had my voice then, or I would have used my voice, because I've always had it. I wish I would have used my voice to ask the questions that I asked then, because it drastically cut the access that our kids had to that program that they looked forward to. And I can still remember one little girl that she still to this day, she ends up being in my 5th grade class, and she is still interested in doing something within the STEM career, into the STEM field. Luckily, she was one of the students that her mom was able to figure out a way to get her to the other location, because that repetition of going to it is something that her heart is now set on. But again, it's just, that's one of those things that now I'm like, it's kind of a regret, because I wish I would have asked the questions of, hey, why did this leave us? Why don't we have it? Why isn't it here? Our kids like it. They deserve it. It's something that they can do.
Right. And it was moved to a school that was not predominantly Black students.
I'm not completely sure their demographic, but I think their demographic is more of like a mixture of.
So
but
just
then access was open though to everybody though. So we have 4 elementary schools, and then the access was open. So when originally the spots were slotted for all of our students, then those got split into 4, and then that's how the access we all
And that just touched on some things that have come out for me in the last couple of weeks, where we've talked about, and different folks have mentioned gatekeepers, right, in different capacities. But often it's been, that our kids, this is not something they're interested in, right? Or this is not something that they can do. And yet you see a program that clearly that's not the case. And so so in terms of that as a case study to talk about, what do we do in that situation, one, right? And then just in general, thinking about barriers, and this seems like this was a particular barrier for those kids, what are some of the suggestions that you guys have on how to address these things? Anyone?
Woo, child.
Mara.
that is a problem of practice right there. As you were talking through the program, I think I immediately was like, oh, they could do this, and this could happen, and this could happen, and they should, and one of the first things I think about is when you're asking questions, right? And sometimes for the powerful and the powerless, that we find ourselves in these spaces and are confronted with injustices, right? And particularly when it's around and about kids, I usually like to ask, was this a kid's first decision, right? Like constantly putting in the forefront with gatekeepers and power brokers, is this a kid's first decision? If they can justify it as how it is going to seek the outcomes, right, for kids first, right, then we can have some conversation. If not, that is the impetus for the push, right? I say all the time, I like it so much, I put it on my body, drives my mom crazy. But if you want peace, right, you have to work for justice, but you must also prepare for war. That goes to Sylvester's point about being ruthless about strategy. This was not a kid's first decision. What's the strategy to get it back to your school, right? Is it sending another teacher or a representative from the school to be able to bring it back? Is it, do you know what I mean? Like, what does that look like? Is it advocating for transportation for students, right? And so I think it's forcing the conversation, because grown people, I love us, but we'll mess stuff up, right? We get in and we overcomplicate things because we haven't been centering kids first in that equation. So that I think that's the impetus for starting the conversation. And I don't think anything is ever too late. It happened, but I'm a big believer of things that are done, right? There's potential for being undone better, right?
Absolutely. Anybody else want to comment?
One of the things I would say is that's why it's also important for us to have ownership in the programs and initiatives that we're running. So when I started Code It by Kids, once things started to work out and people started to see the momentum and it was working, we were gaining traction, at 3 separate occasions, I had larger entities and institutions offer to absorb the organization and basically say to me, we're going to give you this money and we're going to absorb your organization into ours, and then you'll become a program of us. And at every one of those points, I said no, because it's my organization. I'm the one saying, well, this is where we're going to run programs. These are the neighborhoods we're going to be in. These are the communities we're going to be in. People can offer all of the suggestions they want, but ultimately the decision is mine. When we don't have ownership in the programs, when we don't have ownership in the initiatives, the decision isn't ours. And we then become subject to the decisions and whims of other people who don't always have the best interest of our kids and our communities. So it's important that we have that ownership so that we're the ones driving those decisions and making those choices.
Yeah, all right. Thank you both. Edgar, come on, because you're over here snapping. You got something to add?
Not really. That just hyped me up. There's just a couple, I'm stuck on a couple of things, right? This comment around like how our children, Black and brown children specifically, aren't interested in STEM. And, that made me reflect, just me back in 6th grade, and my parents are immigrants. They came in from Nicaragua in 1981, fleeing civil war in their country. And so I had the experience of for the first 11 years of my life to grow up in Miami, where Latino identity and Latino culture is the norm, right? It is the norm for our community there. And then I moved to Spokane, Washington. And Spokane, Washington is not the Latino mecca of the United States. And so I learned a lot of hard lessons within that year. But I think about all the things, I wasn't necessarily interested in STEM, but I used a lot of STEM skills to survive. Like I knew how to count my money. That's math right there.
Right.
I knew how to make my food, which is science right there. You know, I knew how to get away with stuff, which is engineering in a very different way. And I definitely knew how to make phone calls and do other things and also talk to creditors. And so that was a little bit of tech knowledge right there. And so the idea is that these are principles and ideas that we actually apply every day, that we learn naturally, because sometimes it's a matter of survival for us. It's not a matter of like having fun and being inspired. It's a matter like we have to do these things in order to overcome. And so I always get a little bit angry and a little bit more passionate when I hear like that our folks specifically are interested. I always like to push back and say, let's have these real conversations and these real questions around like, do you even want our kids here? Because I think that is the first and foremost question that I like to ask. Like, why? And why? You know, do you want us here and why? Like, are we a check the box kind of opportunity for you all? Are we going to help you meet your grant numbers in a way that's going to make you look better than other organizations? Do you feel like we need to be saved as a community or whatnot? Or do you feel like this is your way to give back and make us feel good about other things? Like, those are not the reasons why we should be teaching or giving access to our students for STEM. Like, it's because this is opportunities for workforce, it's opportunities for careers, it's opportunities for survival. These are things that are very critical to our community that I don't think we often think about. The other thing is like, if I'm a Latino student, why would I go to your STEM program? Like, what's the music like? What's the activities like? What's the food like? Are my parents going to be able to come? Are they going to be able to understand what's going on? Because like, I got to convince them too. And so there are so many other layers to, you know, why we're not interested versus like, why aren't you making it accessible? Why are, you know, to that point of ownership? If Latinos were doing STEM and they had their STEM clubs, and I tell you, we would see a lot of Latinos in STEM.
It'd be a party. Okay, thank you guys. Yes, Samara, because we're going to go to the Q&A, but do you want to just?
I was going to say, there was a question in the Q&A. You go ahead and jump to that, because I want to answer that one.
All right. Well, I'm going to bring Christy on. Christy kind of manages the Q&A for us, so she's going to start throwing out some questions, guys, and we're going to keep rocking and rolling. This has been fantastic.
I'm ready. Some great conversation here. And I'm going to throw this first question to, of course, Samara, she threw me all off my plan. I got highlights and everything going and she's thrown me off, but I'm ready to go with it. So this was for you.
Sorry.
How do you mobilize the parents and families who are most underprivileged and whose youth may be most impacted by non-kid first decisions to be equipped with the right questions and opportunities to speak up?
Woo! This is near and dear to my heart. Edgar and I get to work a lot around answering questions like these. You know, I think it goes down to core organizing. One of the things I was struck by with Sequoia's story is that there's a school board, right? And who is required to be responsive, right? They're elected officials in that responsiveness. And a lot of times with parents, it's moving parents. You know, Edgar, what do we talk about all the time about our ladders of engagement, right? Like, how do you make people aware, number one, that the issue exists? How do you engage them, right, with opportunities to make those changes? How do you push people beyond, you know, big A advocacy, which is beyond just my kid, my school, my teacher, to thinking about, wait a minute, this affects all of us, right? And a lot of times it isn't about the work that you do, it's about the work that you empower other parents to do, right? It's, you know, oftentimes we think we've got to put the whole mission on our back and carry it. And the reality is, it really is about, you know, helping those families, helping parents get proximate to the power. So it could just mean taking a group of 5 to 7 parents to meet with that school board member who is responsible for the school, that school, who oversees that part of the district. I think center's makeup is a little, I have to think through that, but taking them there and saying, you said in your election that you care about STEM, you care about diversity, you care about equity, you care about Black and brown kids. Here's a set of 5 to 7 parents, and here's their thoughts on what needs to happen, right? And it isn't about getting them, prepared to have pretty talk. A lot of times we want to fit parents and community members in a box of what's appropriate for advocacy. And, it's not okay to show up with this bonnet on. Listen, advocacy, you take it wherever you can get it, right? And we're going to take it and really shape it and help to focus it with good education and good awareness, right? People want to speak up, right? I think that much like Sequoia, what you said too, it's a process, but it's about building that trusting relationship and letting folks know, I have your back. Even if we get in there and, the cuss word roll up, and, maybe that's not the best time in front of the live stream school board audience to drop the F-bomb. I'm going to help you be prepared to do that. And that's the work that we have. That's how we hold the door. So yes.
Preach.
Yes.
All right.
I'm snapping now. 'Cause I love this. Advocacy, you take it where you can get it. However it's dressed up, whatever it has to say, we'll take it. So this is going to take me to my next question. It's for Sylvester. I heard this from you over and over. The results that we see for Black and brown students are the results we want to see. So the question for you, do we need to change the system or do we need to create new systems?
It's a combination of both. Ultimately, we need to look towards how do we build new systems where equity is the foundation. But as we're working to what the ideal solution is, we're going to have to figure out how do we produce better outcomes with the systems that we have, knowing that, in terms of that long-term roadmap, we want new systems. The systems we're currently working with, equity was not a foundation. I have this conversation with corporate partners that we work with and companies that we work with, and I'll say, okay, your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives aren't working because all of a sudden you threw equity in as like this last minute thought, like, oh, we need to be more equitable. And then you start to wonder, like, well, how come these things aren't working and people aren't responding well? It's like, well, it wasn't a part of the foundation. It has to be a part of the foundation to truly reap the benefits and the outcomes that you want. We need systems that do the same thing, but there has to be that middle, that intern. And the intern is going to have to be, how do we use what we have to produce something better while we're getting to where we ultimately want to be?
Absolutely. So let's stay on this topic of systems. And this is for Edgar. If the beliefs are driving the system of inequity, how do we change beliefs?
Just a small question.
I don't have a good answer to that. I don't know how you change beliefs. I think the way that I approach this work is by believing that my community has everything it needs to be successful, first and foremost. And so I can't actually be concerned with everybody else's beliefs. I have to be concerned with my own. And I have to be true to what I believe in these spaces. And so I try really hard to find spaces of consensus and to space of where we can unite on certain issues. And I'm really thoughtful about that. But what I'm also learning on this journey is that sometimes no matter what I believe, some people are just not going to like it. Some people don't like truth because it devalues their beliefs or it undermines their beliefs. And so I have to believe in my community first. I have to believe that our students are not deficient in any shape or form. And I have to believe that if we just love on our community, if we show up for our community, that they're going to get what they need in order to be successful, right? And so my approach is a little bit different. And at the end of it, you have to model the way. I do believe that. You have to model the way for others. We have to demonstrate that there are different ways of doing this work and that they can be successful. I'll stop there.
Well, you said you didn't know the answer, and I think we got it. You have to model the way. That's it. That's it. We got it.
Can I
I'm
say,
practicing writing a dissertation,
I want to
so
add
you know,
something
like,
too, but I'll let Sylvester go first. Go ahead, Sylvester.
Mister.
yeah, I would challenge the idea that we do have to change beliefs. So like, I'm the managing director of a venture capital fund focused on underrepresented founders. And I'll have conversations with investors who will say, Sylvester, I don't really believe that race and equity is that big of an issue. So that's definitely not in line with my beliefs. But they'll also say, but I do think your investment thesis is one that will produce returns that we're looking for. So they're still going to invest in the fund. I'm still going to be able to deploy that capital into underrepresented founders. Does it really matter that they don't believe what I believe, or is the bigger part of it that they're still going to invest, so I still am able to deploy that capital and help underrepresented founders? I tend to be, what's the outcome? What am I solving for? And does this get me to what I'm solving for? And if so, we don't necessarily have to believe the same thing, as long as we can align the direction that we're going.
Good point. Andrea, you had something to add?
Yeah, I mean, that was giving me some thought there, because I feel like this, of course, this is all on so many levels, right? Like there is that level of dealing with the venture, capitalists. There is that level of building your own community. And then there are these folks in the middle who are like, I'm not quite sure what to do. I want to be the best person I can be. And I guess what always comes back to me as a truism is it's about building authentic relationships, right? Like, it's like, if you really want to do this work, one, you have to see me as a human being, right? Like, or my Latino brothers and sisters, like our skin, we have some more melanin, but hey, we got the same issues that you have. So first of all, I need you to stop putting me in this other category, one. But two, when you are just being a human being with another human being and you're building relationships, you start to then, I think it changes the way you understand people to be, right? So I don't know, I've had some situations I've seen, in the workplace where people are like, I want to know more about your people, kind of thing. And it's like, okay, calm down. No. Let's just have a conversation about our working relationship in a professional and kind way. And then you'll see I'm kind and intelligent and you're kind and intelligent, and okay, that we don't, but we don't have to necessarily hold hands and skip over rainbow, right? So I just feel like there's this basic fundamental humanity thing that folks need to work at. And that part doesn't have to be as hard if you see us all as human.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I was gonna, can I, sorry, Chris. See, I'm gonna get beat up. Like this, I'm not gonna get to come back. I hope y'all enjoying this and recording this, because they're not gonna let me back.
I'm gonna let you go ahead and give you a minute, Samara, but I got a question for Sequoia that I have to ask, but I want you to go ahead and get that.
Okay, I'll be quick. It's like Kanye West moment. I'm gonna let you finish, but Beyonce had the best. Anyway,
already too long. Go ahead.
One of the things I'm struck by with each of y'all's responses to the question is that we're all on a journey, right? And it is a process. And so, on one hand, I'm like, blow up the system, but no, maybe not yet. Ooh, let's think about this. And what I say, and Sylvester, I think we are sometimes sitting in like similar rooms where I'm like, it's all right that we may not be on the same page about this today, because let's get the money in and let's get the work going, but I can't let you stay here, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to commit both my work and the building of our authentic relationships to help you along in this journey, because it is better for me and society and all of the places that you touch and the power that you exude for you to move beyond this place, right? It is not the barrier to us doing this work together or having a professional relationship or any of those things, but just know with intention, I want to help you move along in that path, right? So, yeah, I think it's we get so very either or and not, thinking about like, it is a journey. We're all on a journey. Thank goodness that I don't still believe the things that I believed when I was 21, right? And hopefully I won't at 61 won't believe the things that I believe today. So, I think that's the beauty of humanity, too, is that we're all on a journey. All right, Kristen, see, I'm done.
Thank you, Samara. That was worth the extra time. Thank you. So this is for you, Sequoia. We know our teachers are our biggest allies and advocates in this work. So you mentioned there was a time when you felt silence. Why did you feel that way? And how do we make sure your voice is heard and all of our teachers' voices are heard?
So I think it's the internal concept of that you could potentially lose your job. Not that anyone necessarily said that, but I think that's just the thing that is internalized. Because I'll be honest, I actually have teachers that have been, since I've started using my voice, I've had teachers that have been teaching way longer than me that have, if you could earn tenure multiple times, have it 3-4 times, but they'll still come to me to try to be their voice. And so one thing that I've started trying to do is that when they come to me, I've tried to start saying, I think it was Samara that said, like, yeah, I'll come along with you. I'll be there with you. And I started encouraging other people. And I know, like, for my own personal, like, I just keep repeating and telling them that, when there's only one or maybe two people that are voicing, it can look like complaints. When we're banding together and we're speaking on these topics and these issues and disparities, that's when we have a chance to inflict that change. And I think it's just one of those things where it's that internal work. We have to make the decision that, the things that are being decided for kids are more important than the possibility of what could happen with our job, and know that we can have that, we can get jobs elsewhere. And that was the thing for me. I got to the point and I said, if I were to get fired because I was advocating for kids, I'd be okay telling my next boss that, because if they don't want me to advocate for kids, I don't need to be there anyway. And that was the thing that has really, like, propelled me forward. And so I think it's just trying to help people see that level of thinking. And then Samara also mentioned those 5 people that you surround yourself with. Being intentional with who you surround yourself with, but then also being intentional with the conversations you have with those people. And I know that within my close knit of teacher friends, some of them have become more vocal, and I won't take their credit for that, but I do continuously encourage them to speak out, and that it's okay, and that, look at me, nothing, it's not, you can speak out and it can be okay. And so I think that's just one of those things where it's the internal work. And I think it's hard because people feel like I feel like when you ask questions, administrators often take your questions as undermining their authority and what they do. And I know for me, that was the internal conflict that I had to get past. And even with my current building administrator, that was something that we even talked about, but now she knows and realizes that my questions aren't to undermine her authority. My questions are to make sure that what we're doing or what we're being told to do is at the best interest of the kids. And then if not, we can work through that, and we can look to see. And she has actually found it to be beneficial, because I'm the person that if she sends out a document or something, she knows I'm going to read it. She knows I'm going to look and I'm going to think about those questions, and that it can actually, it's that whole picture thinking of not just what are we doing to our kids right now, but how can this affect them tomorrow, next week, or when they leave us to middle school.
Thank you so much for that, Sequoia. And I think if not kids first, I don't want to be here, because that's why we're all here, for our kids. I think that's a great way to wrap up this Q&A. And I thank you all so much for your excellent insights. And I'm going to pass it back to Andrea to wrap this up for us.
Yeah, and all I'm going to do is say thank you so much. You guys gave us so much to think about, and to challenge us, and to give us some really, like, action steps, right? Like, I love the fact that everybody has been challenged to come up with your own vision, your own why, to get proximate to power, and then figure out in this next year, what are your 3 to 5 action steps that you are going to put forward. And the KC STEM Alliance thanks all of you for coming and attending for however many weeks you've been able to do so. I know that there is a intention of the KC STEM Alliance to put these recordings online after they kind of get them cleaned up a little bit. So you'll be able to share them for those who haven't been able to come. But Edgar, Sequoia, Samara, and Sylvester, thank you. This was wonderful, and it's given us a lot to work on. And our next steps, did I hear somebody maybe had a question though before did somebody? Okay. The next step is for us to kind of process all that we've gotten over this last 5 weeks, to kind of pull through it and see where the themes are and the big ideas, and then come back out and share with everyone, what kind of came out of this, with some specific kind of action steps for the KC STEM Alliance and Chrissy's new role. So thank you for contributing to that. And I don't know, I'll see you guys on the path in the race, right? In the marathon. So have a wonderful rest of your week. We'll see you soon. Bye.